I told you earlier that I'll be engaging the Minister for Energy and Green Transition, GHOne in Jinapor. 2025 has been a year laden with a lot of scandals, particularly corruption-related scandals, and then issues of flying containers. How did we get here? He'll give us all the issues. He'll lay it bare here on the show. GHOne Jinapor joins me via Zoom. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Am I loud and clear?
Yes, you are. I can hear you very loud and clear. Happy holiday to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, how has it been since you assumed office? I see that your office has been in the news a lot lately.
Quite tough. Naturally, the energy sector is a challenging sector. You know, when the water flows or does not flow, you hear a bit of complaints. If the roads are not good, occasionally people complain. But when the lights go out, people get very agitated, they get angry. And sometimes the minister comes under a lot of fire. When we took office, we had very, very minimal fuel. With some plants, they had no fuel at all. And so right from day one, the president's appointment was for me to try and fix these challenges that we inherited. And it's been quite tough, it's been quite challenging. So far, we've procured fuel to the tune of about $200 million to keep the lights on. The energy sector debt keeps ballooning. As I speak to you, we have a debt of over 80 billion cedis in the books. That is what we need in order to clear the pipeline. The ECG's collections just meets about 60% of what we require to be able to pay for the cost of electricity and fuel. And so every month, the debt keeps compounding. And so we need to halt that, reverse that, and turn the sector around. Then this issue of containers also is come up, which generated a lot of interest. And I'm very happy with the interest that Ghanaians are showing. It means that they want accountability. They want the right thing done. They want us to trace the whereabouts of these containers and to hold people who are behind this development to account. And that's exactly what we are doing. Let me thank the public. This morning, I've received a couple of calls about other areas in terms of warehouses and factories where these ECG containers can be found. And so we'll be moving into action this morning. And it is my hope that we can rope in more people. But beyond that, we also need a small forensic committee that will track these containers. We need to track them using their unique identification numbers or serial numbers, which ports were received, which terminal or container terminal they were received. There will normally be a manifest, and so we should be able to track these containers. Let me thank the Director of Port Authorities, General Tanya. He's been very cooperative. He's willing to help us in any way that we can. Our vision of mission is simple, and it's simple and simple. We want those containers, simple as that. Wherever those containers are, whatever it takes to track those containers, I, as Minister of Energy and Green Transition, I'm determined to do that.
Now, since you mentioned the Director of Ports, I have heard the former Director of Ports say that this is not possible without internal collusion. Have you been able to make clearer a picture as to how this was possible? Because I'm not sure. I have worked, many years ago, I worked at the port. And I'm not sure anybody can go into the port and pick containers and drive out with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It can only be done through the connivance of some people. It's possible that the port authorities then, particularly 2022, 2023, 2024, were complicit. It's possible that ECG officials were complicit. It's possible that there was very bad or poor record keeping. It's also possible that these companies that were contracted by ECG, one of which is not even a registered clearing company, would lift the containers and not deliver them to ECG warehouse. It's even possible that when they get to ECG warehouse, through some cartel, some people probably will steal them. There are so many possibilities, but at least there's one thing that is certain. Is that a lot of these cables have ended up in some warehouses around the Tema enclave, in some factories around the Tema enclave, where these brand new cables are melted into aluminum rods and then exported to China. And then they use these same aluminum rods to produce cables. ECG then spends a lot of money to import the cables, only to end up through that cycle again. That is now clear, and people have been arrested. The security agencies are also pursuing some other suspected Indian nationals and some Chinese nationals. So that one, we know that for sure. The other thing is that we know for sure that, for instance, in 2023, ECG procured close to about 7 billion of what they did not plan or was not approved. And so if you look at the improvement, it was just about 1 billion. They ended up procuring 8.3 billion.
So who then procured this?
Under the leadership of the MD.
Okay.
Yes. So
was it a sole procurement? Did he do it by himself? Did he seek the approval of the board?
well, what I see from the report is that they use what they call their limit.
Okay.
The ECG MD has a limit of up to about $1 million. And so they engage in what they call break procurement. That is to say, they break, if they want to procure something like $20 million, instead of going direct to the board, they will then break these procurements into 900,000, 900,000, 900,000, so that they will be able to meet the threshold. But eventually, they would have still procured the same amount. And if you look at the table, in 2023, a single source procurement was about 512. Request for qualification, 166. National competitive tendering, 0. Board approval, 21. Total number of contracts, 703 contracts. So that tells you that the board only engaged in just about 21 out of the 703 contracts for 2023 in particular. 2022, 0. 2024, only 7 out of 601. And so it's quite alarming and it's quite worrying. And that is where we hope to be looking at, so that we correct that. If you look at their planned procurement, value of planned procurement in 2023 was 935 million, less than 1 billion. But by the end of the year, they had procured 8.3 billion, which means that they procured 7.3 billion over and above what their budget can accommodate.
Right.
And so you had all these containers coming to the ports. They get stuck. ECG is unable to clear them. They say they don't have money, and yet they have money to contract another company, paying them over 126 million to clear the containers. And all these challenges keeps happening. That what aroused my interest was at the transition. We're told that about 300,000 containers were stuck at the port, incurring demurrage of about 1.5 billion. So on assumption of office on the 17th, I met a team on the 20th. We had a briefing, and by 24th, we were at the ports. At the ports, I was told that the containers were 2,500 thereabout. That kind of got me quite alarmed. And so I decided that, look, we need to get to this matter and get the facts. So I briefed the president on 27th, and by 31st, we established the Professor Aqua Seniors Committee to look at it. They only came back and told me that, look, contrary to the information they were giving you, over 1,300 containers cannot be accounted for. And that is where I made it public and decided that we should pursue this matter. So far, the security agencies are helping us. I'm getting a lot of information, some of them very, very worried. And so we have to keep at this matter, get to the full hog, pursue this matter to its logical conclusion, and make the funds available to Ghanaians. All I are the containers. Simple as that. We can't spend the taxpayers' money going to buy new equipment and cables when we have these cables available. And by looking at the numbers, I'm of the view that the Ministry of Energy does not even need to engage in any procurement. Once we retrieve the containers, we can have an agreement with ECG and use some of this equipment, because some of them, they simply don't need them, and they wouldn't need them for so many years to come.
So
That we can use them for
it begs the question,
and then
Mr. Jinapor, it begs the question then, you say some of them they didn't need. Why procure cables and equipment you don't need?
that is the question. Because your budget, as approved, is about 1 billion. That means that you would have gone to the board to justify that you need 1 billion to procure certain items. So when you end up spending 7.3 billion more than you had budgeted, it creates a huge problem, and the variance is just too big. Even if they had spent like 1.5 billion and the variance was like 500 million, even that, we'll criticize that. But when you go more than 7.3 billion, and you know very well that you cannot clear them, and they are stuck at the pot, and they create such huge financial challenge, there's a real problem. The next phase is that those who superintended over these events ought to be given a fair hearing. They ought to be taken through the normal process so that the law will take its course.
You say those who superintended over this. I have heard the minority leader, Alexander Kwame can say that the procurement directors at ECG should be held responsible for this and not former government appointees. Are you heeding to this advice?
I'm sure that the law enforcement agencies would ensure that everybody is given the opportunity to account. When we say accounting for your stewardship, all of us, when we left office, I went to Iyoko severally. National Security Operatives stormed my house. They took my computer, they took my laptop, and took it all the way to the United Kingdom. A lot of forensic investigations. It's part of the process of accountability. And so once you accept such a responsibility, you ought to be available to account. And I think that it will not be limited to only the Director of Procurement. The Director of Procurement alone does not sign contracts. It goes up there. And so I think that it should go beyond that. All those who superintendents ought to be given a fair hearing and a fair trial. So to limit it to the Director of Procurement, I disagree, because it's the board and the management that decided to merge the position of Director of Procurement with that of Estates. The Estate Director doesn't have the requisite qualification when it comes to procurement. And so who took that decision, and why would you do that? You already had a procurement directorate. What informed you to merge them? What did you want to achieve? What was the game plan? Such that you merge the Estates and Procurement Directorate and jettison the Procurement Director, and then put the head of Estate in charge of procurement. And if you read the reports, it tells you that the man they put in charge admitted that he was under pressure to sign contracts. You can check the report, it's there. So who are those who were putting pressure under the head of procurement to sign these contracts? We have to know.
You state the principle of fair hearing. Have you started questioning certain people? I mean, there's a chain. Have you started questioning as part of investigations? Because you are more concerned about recovery of containers, but you also talk about listening to the other side. Have you started questioning?
The security agencies are handling that. Normally, I don't have the requisite knowledge in prosecution. And so I am writing to the Attorney General as well, so that the Attorney General will take a keen interest in this matter. because this is a matter of national interest. You know, everybody's watching all of us, including the minister. So I have to do what is right and proper. And so all the agencies and investigative agencies and the prosecution agencies, their powers will be activated and they'll work at it. But what I can do as minister is that I need those containers. But I also encourage the law enforcement agencies to.
How soon are you writing to the Attorney General?
I've written the letter, it's gone.
Okay.
And the letter to the former BNI, which is now NIB, is also gone. And then I intend setting up a 3 or 5 member committee with expertise in clearing of containers. For instance, we need a sitting or former customs official, a sitting or former post authority official. We need somebody who is worked as a clearing agent or working as a clearing agent. And then if we can get 1 or 2 other experts, they will be able to trace these containers. When did they arrive? Who received them? Who signed for them? When did they leave the port? What does the record show? Which entity lifted the containers? Where did they take the containers to? Who received those containers? If they were sold, were they auctioned? How were they auctioned? Were they properly auctioned? All this information that we need in order to get to the bottom of where the containers are. Then, at least we know that some people have bought some cables.
Okay.
Who did they buy them from? Why did the MD and his team sign all these contracts? Why did they make the procurement unit? The procurement director says he was under pressure. Who put him under that pressure? I'm sure that all these are issues that ought to be investigated so that it will guide us. But going forward, I'm meeting ECG and the MD tomorrow. Immediately, they have to reverse the decouple the merger of the procurement unit and the estate department. That ought to be reversed immediately. They have to stick strictly to their procurement plan and stick to budgets. And then there should be a high level of accountability. And as minister, I want to take a keen interest, particularly in ECG's activities and how they spend their revenues. So at least immediately, there are some decisions that can be taken in order to put ECG on a sound footing whilst we deal with the issues of the past.
But in all of this, how many containers have we retrieved so far?
I'm getting a figure of about 200, but I want to be very cautious. Let me validate that with the agencies. You know, I went to the constituency. I just got back, and I need to get a full briefing tomorrow morning. And so let me appeal to you that kindly allow me get a full briefing tomorrow. Some of them, you can't even see the containers. Their content have already been disgorged from the containers. And so you see a lot of cables in drums. And it will be very difficult to tell the number of containers they use. Because when they take the content out of the container, they then take the container to around Ashaman and dump it there. So there are a lot of containers, ECG containers, empty, but dumped around the Ashaman area. And so we're dealing with a very, very complex situation.
But some have also argued that the people you're arresting are just the lowest hanging fruit. And so these people have not faltered. Over the period, 14 people, what has investigations unraveled? Did they genuinely buy these cables and containers?
I would view that those containers, the cables, ought not to be sold. I thought that the right thing would have been that the state will confiscate them because these are high value items. And so those cables could have reverted to the state so that the state will use them. As I sit here, we need a lot of these cables to strengthen the grid, to strengthen the distribution network, and then make electricity supply more stable and reliable. And there are so many communities without electricity. So I don't hold the view that the best option will be to either sell legally or illegally to these companies, only for them to melt them, turn them into aluminum rods and export them to China. And then they use these same aluminum rods to produce cables, and then we go and buy those cables at very high prices. So I hold the view that that's not the solution.
But how are we able to curtail this? You mentioned earlier that they procured more things and which are sitting at the various ports. Are they also not going to incur demurrage? What's the plan to ensure that they don't go to demurrage, then further auction, and then we come back to the same stories?
Yeah, they are. I've spoken to the Director General of the Ghana Ports Authority so that we can come to an agreement and clear the containers to a safe house. I'm just putting in place proper stringent mechanism. I don't want a situation where in transporting these containers under our care, one or two containers get missing, and you can imagine the reputational damage. And so we've set up a 5-member committee, one rep from my ministry, one from ECG, one from National Security, I think Ministry of Finance or so. I'll check the details. But we're putting in place a very robust, stringent mechanism. And then I've asked them to develop a software where every container that is being taken, the serial number is entered into the system. And as minister, I should be able to monitor. And then National Security would also provide us with 24-hour security at the warehouse. When we do that, we'll then sit with the port authorities and look at the cost involved.
But Mr. Jinapor, do you need a committee to supervise the movement of these containers? These containers have trackers, don't they? Are you not able to set up a room where you're able to track where these containers will go? We are in the era of technology.
But if you don't put people in charge, who do you hold liable? If you just say go and move the containers and tomorrow one container is missing, who are you going to hold reliable? I want somebody to chair. I want somebody I can trust to superintend the movement of the containers, and not just one person, not two people, a minimum of 3, a maximum of 5. And they will sign an undertaking so that when there's a problem, I know who to hold responsible. And this is very, very important for me. Movement of these containers ought to be done in a way that one day nobody comes to say that under my stewardship, these containers got missing. I'm very, very particular about that.
After the recovery of these containers and the further clearing of others, is that where it will end?
No. The law will take its course. I'm not even 100% sure whether you get all the over 1,300 containers, but we are determined to get all the containers. That is the effort. We must get these containers. If we don't get them, we must get the monetary value of these containers. We must hold those who superintended over this mess responsible, and they must account for that through legal means. So it won't end there. We have to trace those containers.
If you say those who superintended, are you talking about the former Minister of Energy, the former board chair of the ECG, the former MD of the ECG as well, procurement directors?
Everybody is under the radar now. Everybody. Let's investigations unveil those whose actions cause this problem. But everybody is under the radar. For me, that is how to go about it.
Are we also to expect further reforms at the ECG beyond decoupling the procurement and then the estate units?
Yeah, absolutely. I want quarterly reports or monthly reports on their procurement. If that was happening, at least the minister would have known that, look, how can maybe first quarter you intended to procure, say, 50 million. Why are you doing 500 million? Something must be wrong. And then you can easily move in. And so we'll put in place stringent measures. But I also have absolute confidence in the current MD. I've received a lot of complaints from people claiming that he's too stringent, And that is the kind of person I want there. And that is why we settled on him. I have full confidence in his credibility, in his judgment, and I encourage the ECG staff to give him every support. If anything goes untoward, we will deal with that. So far, he's implemented some very good reforms, and we are saving a lot of money from the use of their apps, from their technological side, from procurement side. He's undertaking some very, very far-reaching reforms, and I think that we should encourage Engineer Pepene, because we can't continue like this. That is the truth. I get very worried when I look at the figures, and I ask myself, in 2 years' time, how is the energy sector going to be like? Because if we continue this way, let me just be blunt with you, the sector will collapse. And the sector is on the verge of collapse. How can you have a sector that is indebted to more than 80 billion cedis? That's a huge amount, and it's compounding. It keeps compounding. And it's all because of some of these issues. The over 14 billion that has been wasted on these procurements. If we had those monies, we would have used that to pay some other critical obligations, and that will make the sector much, much better. And so it doesn't end here. There's a lot we can do. We can do a lot of restructuring with ECG and begin to put it on the sound footing, because ECG is the Achilles heel. If we don't get it right, we won't get the whole sector right. And also, I intend extending this to NETCO. And I've told the NETCO MD, I've written to them, instructing them to do certain things and report to me as minister. That will help us to reform that sector. We must improve on what we inherited and be more accountable. But I don't even foresee major contracts being awarded and the rest, because looking at the items you've procured, I don't think that we should be procuring so many things again. What we need to do is to salvage what has been procured and use them for the betterment of this country. Even at the Ministry of Energy, I don't think that we'll be engaged in too many procurements.
You mentioned that the current ECG MD has saved the country a lot of money. Are you able to put a figure to it so that I'm sure Ghanaians are listening? They want to know, how much have we saved so far?
For instance, there was an app that we used to pay about three CDs or so. He's beat it by more than half through negotiation and tweaking what they do. That is very, very commendable. I mean, if you cut what you'd have paid by 50%, and then we've also decided that HEG should not take overdrafts to do weekly payments. But that comes at a huge cost. We told them, let's all wait. By the end of the month, we know how much you've collected, and then through the cash waterfall mechanism, we do the apportionment. And so that also is a huge saving. Because when I looked at their financials, I realized that every month, what they do is that every week they go to the banks and take overdraft and pay for their power producers and others. And so by the end of the month, whatever money they collect, the banks take it, and then they slap some very, very huge interest on that. We've stopped that. Everybody should be patient. By the end of the month, all of us will know how much has been collected. And then we apportion them. These two alone saves a lot of money. He's also halted a lot of their procurement. Even the meter replacement exercise, he's halted it. He wants to reform it so that the meters are indeed used for their intended purposes. Normally, you won't see the benefits of these things in one day. But as we move on, by and large, you'll begin to see that we're making huge savings and putting some very good reforms in order to turn the sector around.
Now that you mentioned the cash waterfall mechanism, I'm intrigued. Various analysts prior to 2025 said that we have not fully realized the potential of the cash waterfall system. What is your approach?
Our approach is a very transparent way of going about the cash waterfall mechanism, and I will publish it. I send a copy to the president, I send a copy to the minister, I send a copy to all the agencies. The PLC chairs the cash waterfall mechanism, but as sector minister, with oversight responsibility. I have a keen interest and I make very good suggestions to them. So we've even set up what we call a fuel account so that we can get something to save to also cater for fuel costs. The problem is that the collections are not enough and the cash waterfall is as effective as the collection. So if you do not collect enough, it means that you don't have enough to share. But at least everybody gets a little of the pie as we go through the cash waterfall mechanism. So that is not the solution. That is one of the steps towards resolving the challenge. The major problem confronting ECG today, I can break them to 2 or 3. 1, collections. They are not collecting the money.
Okay.
2, they are not billing the way it ought to be billed. 3, the little they get, in my opinion, there's a lot of wastage. And you can just see from all these procurements. If we can tackle these 3, and then maybe 4, the response time. More often, I get complaints about a particular area that is gone off. I check the grid and I'm reliably informed that we are not shedding load, but maybe a transformer is off. The response time can be improved significantly. And that is something I really want us to pay attention to. And that's why we are trying to bring the private sector in the activities of ECG, not to sell the company, but at least billing and collection, maintaining some portions of the network, responding to calls. I think that the private sector can do it. We are seeing it being done in the petroleum.
Maybe I want to get it clearer. In essence, you are not entirely looking at a wholesale privatization of the ECG, but the billing and collection units. Is that it?
Yes, we think that it's a strategic security asset. So don't sell it outright. But through a concession, you can bring in 2 or 3 companies. They will take charge of billing, they will take charge of selling, and also take charge of some portions of maintaining the system so that you hold them responsible. So if you take, for instance, your area, if you were the company, your duty would be to bill and collect because there will be a boundary meter, and the boundary meter will tell us at the end of the month the quantum of power that came through your area. And also we'll set up a robust system so that if somebody's lights go off, you would, within a certain minimum period, go and restore that light and report to the system. If you're unable to do that, there will be a penalty, and that will affect the money you get at the end of the month. I'm sure when we do something like that and we get it right, and we do it through a very competitive process and get the right companies, we'll see some improvement. But it doesn't end there. There are other areas that goes beyond ECG that all of us have to help them to tackle. The tariff structure, for instance, is skewed. It's not cost reflective. That's a fact.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not making up. If you look at the tariff structure, all the capacity is not being factored in the tariff structure. A lot of the MMDAs are not paying. You are paying. You are an ordinary Ghanaian, you are paying. So the MMDAs ought to pay. Ghana Water in particular has not paid even 1 cedi. And I've written to the president. Let me be clear. If they continue like that, we'll cut them. If Ghana Water continues to sell water, collect money, and not pay for the electricity bills, we'll be compelled to cut them because you are paying, so they ought to pay. And I also think that the minister should look at Ghana Water as well, the procurements and everything, and ensure that we cut costs. Because where we are, the only way out is to bring about a high level of efficiency and reduce wastage.
How much are we talking about in terms of Ghana Water? Sorry to cut in, but how much are we talking about? You say they have not paid a single cedi. How much are we talking about in debt?
Talking of millions of cedis, millions, and their bills are very, very high. I can extract that maybe even as we attempt to, because the MD, Engineer Kwekwane, keeps updating me on some of the activities. Even Parliament, he's written to Parliament. Demand notice. We are going to follow a program where ordinary consumers like you and I would pay, but also institutions like Parliament, like Ghana Water, Like GBC, for instance, we cut them. They've had to come and give us a payment plan in order to put them back. And so when you do that, we put you back. But if you default again, you'll be taken off. It's one, we can't help it. Other than that, it means that somebody will not be paying. It will create a deficit, and eventually it will catch up with us. So I'm clear in my mind. Look, we want to do what is right, but it cannot be business as usual. We can't do that. My sister, if we continue like that, I'm clear in my mind that this sector will collapse. So something ought to be done now in order to avert an eventual collapse. And institutions like Parliament, Ghana Water, Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, I think this weekend we took another one off. Is it NITA or something like that? The minister has had to come in, and we are rational. If we take you off and you come with a payment plan, and we are convinced that you will stick to it, we will put you back. But if you don't stick to that, take it from me, we'll cut you. And so Ghana Water, I've written to the minister, my good friend Kenneth J. I've written to the chief of staff requesting for a meeting, because we also want to be sensitive so that we can look at these issues. But I'm clear, if they don't live up to expectation, we will at them. And that I'm clear in my mind.
You talk about, since you're looking for the figures for me, you talk about major issue of billing for the ECG. We are learning of reports of the IMF demanding 40% increment in electricity tariff. Is that something that you will implement? Is that report true?
Yes. When we had our last meeting with the IMF, they had indicated that as part of the conditionalities of the IMF, there ought to be quarterly adjustment, and they agreed with the previous government on a certain formula. And that should take it to 48% by the end of the year, 48%. But we've been engaging them and then trying to convince them, for them to understand that that will be quite biting. Mine is to work very hard with all the sector agencies to improve the system. If we improve the collection, if we reduce the losses, if we bring about efficiency, it means that you are saving more money for power producers and others in the value chain. But it's a process, and we've started that. So the IMF is coming to town, I think, this week. I think so, on tomorrow. Tomorrow. And so we'll be meeting them.
But what is the proposal on board for them? Since you say 48% is too much, what is the proposal on the table from your end?
Well, that is even the work of the PURC. They do, tariff setting is really the job of the PURC. But as a government, we are also concerned. And so I've requested of the PURC to also seek our opinion. And then we can all do what is right and proper. What we seek to do is to do what is right and proper. I don't have any shortcut measures to these things. And in economics, I keep saying that there are no shortcuts. You take a shortcut here, you meet it at another level. What we can do is to be pragmatic, is to be transparent, is to be efficient, be accountable, and do what is right and proper. If we do that, some of them very unpopular. A lot of people have gone to report me that they are not getting their monies from ECG and all that. And it's true. I share in their pain, because a lot of people have supplied to ECG. They've used bank loans. Now they are in a fix, and the banks are selling their properties. So, but we also have to deliver power. If we don't pay the IPPs, they will stop producing power. We'll have no power to sell. And so there will be no revenue collection, let alone pay others in the value chain. So we need to balance it and ensure that we carry everybody along. But it's a very difficult, it's a very tough situation I find myself. And we have to crack our brain and think outside the box in order to come up with solutions.
Now, let me ask you, what's the latest on the power situation in the Ashanti region? You visited weeks ago.
Yes, we've been able to change that transformer from a 66 MVA to a 146 MVA. So it means that the grid is very strong, but we have to keep monitoring. And so I've asked for a weekly systems average interaction frequency report. I think it's called Cypher or so. So ECG would give me that report every week. I'll also liaise with the regional minister and the national security operatives to give me a weekly report. There's enough power now. We are generating enough. The transmission is good. But the distribution sector is very, very weak. And it's weak because of some of these things we are talking about. Maybe if ECG has stuck to their procurement plan, they could have cleared all these containers, cleared all these transformers, would inject them into areas like Ashanti region and to stabilize the power. But I will be visiting Ashanti region myself in the coming days again. Because I went to commission the plant. I want to go back again, have a meeting with them, and have a real view or briefing on what is happening there. But last week's report will come to me, I think tomorrow, when we meet, and we'll review it. And it won't just be Ashanti region, it should be the whole of this country. What can we do to ensure that the power is stable, especially when it rains? In Accra here, when it rains, a lot of power go off.
Yeah.
These days, the rainstorm caused a lot of outages. We should get to a level where, whether rain or sunshine, we are able to supply power. But that costs a lot of work, a lot of investment in a rational manner so that we can make progress.
You say there's enough power, but the only challenge is distribution. Is it enough power for the entire general distribution or just for the Ashanti region?
For the whole country.
For the whole country.
We have enough power for the whole country in terms of generation. And so yesterday, for instance, I get a daily report. This is the supply outlook, March 31st, 2025. Peak period. It gives me the gas supply, 68 mm scarf, and gas, Ghana Gas, ENI, all of them supplies 228 mm scarf, Asogli, Send Power, AXA, Car Power, Bui, Akoso, Motapco. Then yesterday, and that is where it comes, domestic, you see something like 50 megawatts. So we then reduce export. So there'll be no reduction in export to Sonabel. That means that Burkina were able to supply all the power. Export to CIE, which was Cote d'Ivoire, will be reduced to 70 megawatts instead of 120. So that we use that 50 to balance up what we require in Ghana. And then there will be no reduction in export to CEB, which is Togo. So yesterday, we're exporting power to Burkina, we're exporting power to Cote d'Ivoire, we're exporting power to Togo. Just that we had to reduce the export by 50 megawatts in order to meet our demand. So the bottom line is that no load management will be required during the peak period today. Thank you, Honorable Minister. So that's the briefing I get every day. Sometimes, occasionally, you can have a challenge, and that is the system. But I can confirm that for a long time now, I've had a reliable supply of generation. And then the transmission system is also very strong. The problem is the distribution end. And that is where we are focusing on to see how we can improve the distribution. Because what you want is that when you switch your light on, you have the power. It's not enough to generate. It's not enough to just transmit. You ought to deal with the distribution side as well so that it will be complete. And we are working very hard on all this.
Let you go. What's our state with the IPPs?
I have a meeting with the IPPs and the finance minister tomorrow. Today I have a meeting with one or two IPPs in the office. So I'll be going to the office this morning around 11 to have some meetings. I need to prepare well before we meet the finance minister. I think tomorrow or Thursday, I'll check my itinerary. We'll be meeting the IPPs with the finance minister. In all this, I keep telling the finance minister that he's like my twin. because eventually we'll end up at this table. So we want to make the IPPs.
Okay.
We also want to see if we can reduce the cost from the IPPs. After they do some detailed analysis, I'm still not convinced about the bills we are getting and how, because when you say capacity charge, it means that the IPP has to declare availability.
Yeah.
Do they really declare availability? And now with demand virtually meeting supply, the issue of excess capacity is not really a major problem now. And so how do we dispatch them? How do they declare availability? How do they bill us? These are things that I want us to scrutinize carefully. I'm not drawing any conclusion. I just want to do a full proof of the system so that if there are any lapses or any inefficiency, we can correct it.
Okay. Thank you very much. I wish you very well. And I'm sure in the coming days we'll engage more on where we are in all of these investigations and the things that you've enumerated. Thank you very much and have a happy holiday. That's the Minister for Energy and Green Transition, GHOne Jinapor. He's also the Member of Parliament for Yape Kuso in the Northern Region.